Okay, goddamn, bro. I'm dirty as hell. I'm a pig. Ah, that's nasty. Alright, let's put a timer. Hopefully I can steady for 2 hours. At least close. 2 hours. I'm trying to play some Rocket League. Okay, let's go. Everything good. It's just gonna be my face for now. I'll fix it later. Later on, it'll be better. Where's my mic? It'll be better. Alright. Despite the common sense belief that people do not confess to crimes they did not commit, 20 to 25% of all DNA exonerations involve innocent prisoners who confessed, distinguishing between voluntary. English comp. Comp 2, yeah? It's a class, yeah? In criminal law, confession evidence is highly persuasive, yet fallible. Despite the persuasive myth that people do not confess to crimes they did not commit, the pages of American history, beginning with the Salem witch trials of 1692, bear witness to all the men and women who were wrongfully convicted and imprisoned, often because of false confessions. Although the prevalence rate is unknown, recent analysis revealed that 20 to 25% of prisoners exonerated by DNA had confessed to police. The percentage is far higher. Taxonomy: voluntary, compliant, and internalized, still used today. This classification scheme has provided an important framework and has since been used, critiqued, extended, and refined in subtle ways. Voluntary false confessions are those in which people claim responsibility for crimes they did not commit without prompting from police. Often this occurs in high-profile cases. When Black Dahlia actress Elizabeth Short was murdered in 1947, more than 50 people confessed. In 2006, John Mark Carr confessed to the unsolved murder of young John Bennett Ramsey. There are several reasons why innocent people volunteer confessions, such as a pathological need for attention or self-punishment, feelings of guilt or delusions, the perception of tangible gain, or the desire to protect someone else. In contrast, people are sometimes induced to confess through the processes of police interrogation. In compliant false confessions, the suspect acquiesces, acquiesces, I don't know, in order to escape from a stressful situation, avoid punishment, or gain a promised or implied reward. Like the social influence observed in Milgram's classic obedience studies, this confession is an act of public compliance by a suspect who perceives that the short term benefits of confession outweigh the long term costs. This phenomenon was dramatically illustrated in the 1989 Central Park jogger case, in which five New York City teenagers confessed after lengthy interrogations, each claiming he expected to go home afterward. All the boys convicted and sent to prison. All the boys were convicted and sent to prison, only to be exonerated in 2002 when the real rapist gave a confession that was confirmed by DNA evidence. It's so crazy. Lastly, internalized false confessions are those in which innocent but vulnerable suspects, exposed to highly subjective interrogation tactics, not only confess but come to believe they committed the crime in question. Wow. The case of 14-year-old Michael Crow, whose sister was stabbed to death, illustrates this phenomena. After lengthy interrogations, during which Crow was misled into thinking there was substantial physical evidence of his guilt, he concluded that he was the killer. "I'm not sure how I did it. All I know is I did it." Drizzen and Colgan, 2004, page 141. Eventually, he was convicted that he had a split personality, that bad Michael Jackson acted out of jealous rage, while good Michael blocked the innocent from consciousness. The charges against Crow were later dropped when a drifter from the neighborhood was found with Crow's sister blood on his clothing. Inspired by tales of innocents wrongfully convicted, recent research has focused on three sets of questions. Why are innocent people often misidentified for interrogation? What factors put innocent suspects at high risk to confess? And how accurate are police, juries, and others at judging confession evidence? I'm reading this right now. Typically, the confrontational process of interrogation is preceded by an information gathering interview conducted by police to determine if the suspect is guilty or innocent. In criminal interrogations and confessions, Inbauer, Reid, Buckley, and Jane, 2001, the most influential manual on interrogation, police are thus advised on the use of verbal cues, nonverbal cues, and behavioral attitudes to detect deception. Yet they claim exceedingly high levels of accuracy. For a person who is falsely accused, the first impression may determine whether he or she is interrogated or sent home. Yet in laboratories all over the world, research has shown that people are only about 54% accurate in judging truth and deception. That training produces little, if any, improvement compared to naive control groups, and that police, custom inspectors, and other so-called experts perform only slightly better, if at all. Bond and DiPaolo, 2006. In a study that examined performance in a criminal context, some lay participants but no others were randomly assigned to training in a popular law enforcement method of lie detection. Casey and Fine, 1999. These students then watched videotaped interviews of suspects, some guilty and others innocent, denying their involvement in various mock crimes. As in past studies, observers could not differentiate between guilty and innocent suspects. Importantly, those who underwent training were less accurate, more confident, and more biased toward seeing deception than were those who had not received training. So it makes you more confident. Interesting. In a follow-up study with these same tapes, experienced detectives were tested, and they exhibited the same tendencies, making prejudgments of guilt with confidence that were frequently in error. Meissner and Case in 2002. At present, psychological scientists are seeking ways to improve human lie detection performance. Some studies have shown that interviewers can boost their accuracy by withholding crime details while questioning suspects, trapping those who are guilty but not those who are innocent. And inconsistencies when these facts are disclosed. Hardwick, Graham, Stromwell, and Verge, 2005. Other studies have suggested that because lying is more effortful than telling the truth, interviewers who tax a suspect's cognitive load, example, by distraction or by having interviewees tell their stories in reverse order, can make more accurate true-false judgments by attending to effort cues such as hesitations. Rich Fisherman and Leo 2006. Interesting. Imagine having to confess backwards. I'm at the grocery store. I walked in and saw a man in a hoodie before I got robbed. I walked in and I saw a man in a hoodie. I parked in the driveway. The man was going into the store. I saw him with the corner of my eye. Before that, I was at home. Hell, that's trippy. People who are highly anxious, fearful, depressed, delusional, or otherwise psychologically disordered, and people who are mentally retarded are particularly prone to confess under pressure. Why am I saying words like this? Pressure. For a review, see Good Johnson 2003. Youth is a particularly substantial risk factor. 90% of juveniles who when police seek to question waive their Miranda rights. Wait, what? I'm reading this wrong. As measured moments later, this manipulation also increased the number of subjects who actually believed they were culpable. That's a different professor who gave me that. That was Mr. Rush. No, Mr. Wolf. Interesting. Okay, this is goofy. Then, should I listen to the podcast? Yeah. The episode is unavailable. What? Hello? Okay. That is not supposed to be like that, is it? Wow. It's really not supposed to be like that. Well, that's insane. Uh, we always known that Jay lies. Jay admits he lies. The real enigma here is why. The first time I realized that Susan Simpson might be the person who actually solves what happened in this case was when I read a blog she wrote about Jay's police statements. I've had these statements for years. I've looked at them, I've read and reread them, and I'd always said some things not so wrong. I'd always said something so wrong. This is all so wrong. What is going on here? Jay lies. He admits it. But no one, not even Sarah Koenig, could figure out why he lied. What was animating these lies? What is the utility of these lies? What is the method behind this madness? And then Susan, and then bam, Susan figured it out. She figured out that no one else in all years, not even Syria could find out, because all this time we had been trying to plot Jay's dream. But it turns out it was never a dream to begin with. Have you read my blog? You've read my blog. You know that I've spent a lot of time analyzing Jay's interview statements. There's a lot of weird stuff in there, but when you read a transcript, the context for a lot of statements is lost. There's a lot of statements is lost. When parts of the dialogue don't seem to make sense or don't add up, you're left wondering if there's some sort of tone of voice or some inflection or something else about the interaction that could explain why they're saying the things they said. So when I finally got to the audio for the interviews a couple of weeks ago, I was pretty excited. The first thing that stood out to me was the pauses. They're long, they're frequent. They don't show up in the transcript. So I had no idea exactly how long Jay was waiting in between answers. Um, he didn't know what to say a lot of the time. You just hear 10, 15, 20 seconds of him apparently thinking of how to answer a question, and they don't show up in the transcripts because they just show what he said without the gaps. So then I noticed something else. The same thing kept happening over and over again. To show you what I'm talking about, let's play a clip from one of the interviews. Here. Jay is describing what happens after he and Adnan go to Patapsco State Park to smoke weed, or as Jay puts it, to go rock an L in the park. Detective Michael Vari. Okay, what happens then? We leave there. I believe. Can you bear with me for a minute? Uh, okay, we left there. I take him. I took him back to school, and I dropped him off. Did you catch that? Jay responding to someone after that pause, and not just that. There's tap tap, and then Jay says, "Oh, okay," and then suddenly a moment later he knows the answer. Interesting. I first heard the tapping after I listened to the clips a few times. And then shortly after that, I found a document in the police file that seemed to correlate with those tappings. And I spent a lot of time checking and double checking to make sure I wasn't hearing something that wasn't there, or that this wasn't a tapping that appeared all over the interviews in all kinds of places. But again, and again, the pattern held. Jay gets confused, pauses too long, or starts to say the wrong thing, and tap tap tap, and Jay knows the answer suddenly. So I finally got the clips together, and I sent them to Mar, our sound guy. I asked him to make sure those sounds were really there. So he cleaned up the audio for me, and yeah, those sounds are there. Let's play that same clip again, this time with the audio cleaned up. And I can't hear it because the freaking episode doesn't work. Okay, 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 what happens then? We leave there, um, I believe. Can you bear with me for just a minute? I, okay, we left there. I take him. I took him back to school, and Jay forgot what happened after Patapsco. He didn't remember the next sequence of events involving him taking Adnan to track so that Adnan can set up an alibi. But a tapping reminds him. I believe. Can you bear with me for a minute? Okay, we left there. To show what the tapping's actually doing, let's look at another clip. This one's from the first interview, and it's describing what happens after Anand and Jay leave Edmondson Avenue and head up towards the park and ride. Car, follow me. Car, follow me. And so I get in the car and I follow him, and we end up at 70 Park and ride off. Um, what is that? Uh, Cook's Lane. What is that? It sounds like Jay is referring to something like a map. In fact, there are a series of maps in the police file with cell towers labeled and the times of key uh, calls scribbled in. These maps don't display most road names, but they do list some of the roads, and Cook's Lane is one of the roads labeled leading directly to the park and ride. In fact, almost without exception, the only roads that Jay is capable of naming are the roads that are displayed on this map. Here's what Jay says when he asked to describe what happened. Ow! When Patrick didn't answer his phone. That's a 3:59 p.m. call. Um, that Jay says was a call to try and find weed. Now, in this clip, listen to the paper shuffling that occurs just as Jay switches to the part of the story involving a trip to Forest Park and try and score weed. Where do you what do you often what do you do then after? What do you do then after? Um, the phone message. We hit the park to see if we couldn't find a corner salesman. There, we go down there. We buy 2 dime sacks. We turn around. I believe we stopped to get blunts on um, Rogers and Gwyn Oak and Rogers on the corner of Gwyn Oak and Rogers. Again, we have a long pause, and suddenly James comes up with the answer. He names a corner, Rogers and Gwyn Oaks. For a guy who says he doesn't really know street names, that's oddly specific. And it also never came up in his first interview. So how is he suddenly remembering now the name of the corner that he didn't know back then? Well, it turns out that among those roads listed on the maps in the Forest Park area, there are only a couple of corners that are named, and yet Gwyn Oak and Rogers are amongst the two most prominently displayed. The next part of the interview, this is also from the first interview, Jay describes how he went to meet Adnan off to Edmondson Avenue after getting the come get me call. Jay immediately starts talking about how he then followed Adnan to some other location. He's jumping to the part of the story where they go to the park and ride. But the cops stop him. They prompt him to get back on track and tell about the next important event in the story. You arrive 20 minutes later in this location on Edmondson Avenue. Then what happens? Um, I drove. I followed him to. I f- followed him out. Do you get out of your car when you get to Edmondson Avenue and have any conversations with him? Yeah. Tell me about that. Um, we get out. Oh, and he's he's walking around with the red gloves on. Red gloves. What kind of gloves are they? winter. They're winter gloves with gloves, or yeah, they're like wool with leather palms, and in that the spark. I was, what the fuck are you walking around with those gloves on for? And then I'm sorry, and pops. He goes, I did it. I did it. You don't fucking believe me? I did it. And he pops the trunk open and he's like, she's all bent up and the blue in the trunk. Jay's for his interview. Okay, so in case you didn't catch that, listen to the last part one more time. Jay started making up some conversation that had with Adnan about his gloves, and a conversation Jay never even mentions again and has no point. The cops don't like it. They stop him, and then Jay changes the direction of the story. Oh, and he's walking around with red gloves on. Red gloves. What kind of gloves are they? Winter. They're winter gloves with cloth gloves, or yeah, they're like wool with leather palms and that sparked. I was, what the fuck are you walking around with those gloves on for? And then I'm sorry, and then he goes, I did it, I did it. You don't fucking believe me? I did it. And he pops the trunk open and he's like, she's all bent up and and blue in the trunk. And first Jay apologizes. Why is he apologizing? Because someone in that room is giving him a look or a stare, telling him that he screwed up. He got it wrong. Then you hear a tap sound, and Jay says the word pops, as if he's reading it. And then confidently he launches into the story that he'd forgotten before. The part about how Adnan pops the trunk open and shows him Hayes' body. Another thing I've discussed in my blog is how convoluted Jay's whole story about the burial really is. It's way over elaborate and involves 3 or 4 trips back and forth from a parking spot to the burial site and involves an extremely inefficient series of events, and Jay can't keep track of it. He really gets confused trying to describe where all these pieces are moving about, trying to describe where the shovels are, where the car is, where Nan's car is, and where Hayes' car is. And he often forgets one of these cars, and he'll end up describing how Adnan was walking around the streets, forgetting that Adnan should have had Hayes' car to drive around. So when Jay tries to describe in the interview where Hayes' car was located, guess what we hear again? That's right. And both cars are parked back in the spark. And both cars are parked back in the spark. And both cars are parked back. And both cars are parked back in the parking spot. No, just his car. Her car had been moved to the uh, spot around the corner prior to us digging the hole. Spot around the corner. Um, spot around the corner prior to us digging the hole. Let's play that cleaned up again so you can hear it better. We have McKinley asking Jay where the cars are and trying to suddenly remind Jay they parked back in the parking spot. Jay says, well, no, her car is da 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 da. And suddenly he knows it's around the corner and the spot is shown on the maps. You can see the burial site and you can see the road where it does kind of dog leg back to where the cars were supposed to be. Someone's tapping on that corner. And both cars are parked back in the parking spot. No, just a car, blah, blah, blah. The detectives are not shy about reminding Jay how many cars he's supposed to have at any point in the story and where those cars are supposed to be. But as the interviewer goes on, they start getting less subtle about it. In fact, Detective Magalavari starts sounding downright exasperated. I don't really blame him because Jay screws up quite a bit. So Jay makes his umpteenth mistake of the day. Umpteenth mistake of the day, and you can hear the frustration from the detectives. What do you do then? What do you do then? What do you do then? Um, um, we drive to Westview. Um, I, so I told him take me home. And on the way going home, we passed by Westview, and he says, I better get rid of this stuff. You've got two cars. You've got two cars. You've got two cars. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm missing. It's okay. Top spots. Yes, I'm sorry. We leave. We still do have two cars. He motions for me to follow him. I follow him. We're driving around all in the city. Ask him where in the hell we're going, and he says, "Where's a good strip at? I need a strip. Where's a good strip at? I need a strip." Okay, so Meligar reminds him that they've got two cars, and Jay apologizes and adopts it into his story. It's worth noting, though, that Jay immediately forgets again that there are two cars in the story. Did you hear what Jay started describing? Uh, so what under is he refer? I'm missing top spots. It turns out the police file doesn't just have maps. It also has a document called Jay's Chronology. Chronology has a numbered list of 24 events about what occurred on January 13, and event number 22 starts at the very bottom of the page and continues on the second page. It says Jay in Honda follows Adnan and Nissan to 300 Edgewood where Nissan is dumped. So what is Jay missing? In one of the top spots. Gonna be Jay meant he was missing page 2 of the chronology, and then when he found where page 2 was, he was reading off the top spots of it. Sounds like it. Now, there are also other indications in the interviews that Jay is following up the chronology. For example, let's take what happens after Anand receives a phone call from Officer Adcock. Adcock? According to Jay's chronology document, the next two events are number 16 and 17. Number 16 says, Adnan asks Jay to help get rid of the body. They drive to Jay's house, get shovels, then to park and ride. Number 17 says Jay in Honda follows Adnan and Nissan to Rolling Road, to Dodgewood, to Holyfield, to Johnny Cake, and back to Woodlawn. And eventually to Dodgewood, to Kerning, to other streets and the burial site. Let's see how Jay tries to describe these two events in his story. Um, we go back to the 70 Park ride. He gets out of his car, tells me to follow him. He gets into her car. Um, he drives it. We drove around to a whole bunch of different places. Uh, some off of Rolling Road, uh, some off of Dogwood Road. Um, Finally, he goes down past Leaky Park. He yeah, no, this is wrong. I'm sorry. I missed that. I missed something. We leave Christy and Jeff's, and I ask him to drop me off. And we go back to my house, and we're standing on my porch. That's when he tells me that we have to go back. You have to get rid of the body. You have to get rid of the body. We have to get rid of the body. He apologizes and said that he missed something. Yeah, he did. He missed number 16, and eventually he realized and went back to it and added into the story. And that brings us to Christy, aka not her real name, Kathy, and how it is, she came to be part of this story. So Kathy says that Adnan and Jay visited her place on the 13th, and as we talked about earlier, her memory is actually linked to a different day. So why does Kathy's apartment magically appear in Jay's later interviews? Well, it goes back to those maps. The one in the police file. In one map, the detectives have the location of a certain cell tower correctly marked. It's a tower that's next to Westview Mall, not too far from Jay's house. And in this map, the one the detectives were using, it also displays fast food restaurants. So right next to where the detectives have the cell tower marked, here's a McDonald's shown. It's on Rolling Road. Here's what Jay says in his first interview about the phone call Adnan received from Officer Adcock. Detective Ritz. When he gets when he gets the call from the officer, when he gets the call from the officer, when he gets the call from the officer, mhm, Where are you guys? Are you up at the park and ride? Are you up at the park and ride? No, we're at a restaurant. We're sitting down eating. Where exactly? What what's the name of the restaurant? Um, I think McDonald's on Rolling Road. On McDonald's Rolling Road? Yeah, at a McDonald's on Rolling Road. We know Jay was lying about this. He is admitted to it. So where did he get such an oddly specific lie from? I can think of one way that he might have been able to figure that out. There is this map of a cell tower that shows it right next to McDonald's on Rolling Road. In the second interview, though, Jay suddenly says that he was at Kathy's when the cops called. In fact, that's the second trip that Jay had made to Kathy's that day. He says he was also at Kathy's an hour earlier while Adnan was at track. Where do you go? I I go out. I was on my way home, but then I stopped off at Gilston Park and I smoked another blunt before I went home, and then long pause followed by a tap. I I think maybe I may have gone. Yeah, I went to Christie and Jeff's, and he called me from the cell phone there, and then I left Christie's and Jeff's. Hang on. So once again, we have a long awkward J pause. There's a tap, and Jay magically comes up with the right answer. Jay's lying, man. Jay's lying. Did I read the wrong one? No. Episode 5. Hopefully, it's a shorter episode. It's six pages. Okay. I got the chance to talk to Dr. Colin Miller. I got the chance to talk to Dr. Lee Hlivety about the evidence we have in this case. She's Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office in Detroit, Michigan. She's also a clinical assistant professor of anatomic pathology at office in Detroit, Michigan. Oh, at the University of Michigan. She's graciously agreed to review the autopsy report of Min Lee, the autopsy photos, and the testimony by the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Before we start, a few caveats. First, the autopsy photos are black and white and they're fairly low resolution. Second, unfortunately, the state's file doesn't include any photos of Hayes' body, as it was found in Lincoln Park. And before it was disinterred, one last note, sound quality in Dr. Alvarez's end isn't great. We're sorry about that. We thought that was what she had to say was so interesting that it was worth hearing her say it in her own words. During our conversation, we talked about one of the autopsy report findings, which I found to be especially odd, and that had to do with the hemorrhages that were found on Hayes' body, on Hayes' head. Let's listen to my question and Dr. Helvarli's response. Again, I apologize for my recording equipment and the quality of sound on her end. Colin Miller. The autopsy report for Heyman Lee says that she had a focal right temporalis muscle hemorrhage, and she also had a focal right occipital subgaleal hemorrhage. And so, what do those two things mean? Well, the temporalis muscle hemorrhage is a bruise in the muscle that is located above your right ear. That is visible after your scalp is reflected. So it's the muscle that's located between the scalp and your skull. And the right occipital subgaleal hemorrhage is a bruise that is actually on the surface of the scalp itself. The scalp itself, on the right back of the head. As to what these mean, we have to think again about the lividality pattern in the head because when blood pools in the scalp due to body position, it can sometimes mimic these subscalp hemorrhages. Um, in this case, because there is this full frontal anterior lividity, these bruises on the right side, on the side of her head, mean that these two are blunt force impacts to her head that she sustained while she was alive. Obviously, you don't have full evidence to be able to see the extent of these hemorrhages, but based upon the description in the autopsy report, do you think these hemorrhages are consistent with blows that could have rendered Lee either stunned or unconscious? Yes, it is possible that she could have been momentarily stunned or rendered unconscious with either one of these blows. According to Dr. Harvey, that the wounds are consistent with any broad, flat object striking her head with enough force. It could be a fist, it could be a hand, it could be a dashboard, it could be a window, any type of flat object you can imagine would be consistent with those head wounds. Ew. It's officially been 50 minutes since we started studying. Pretty cool. And we don't have a lot. Damn. You ever just want to go or like, or like, damn, bro, I got nice eyelashes. Hey, baby girl. Stop. Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting to me. I mean, it's sad, but in looking at research and studies on strangulation, what you most typically find are nail marks and other injuries not from the actual assailant, but from the victim because they're trying to get the hands off their throats. And there are no signs here of a struggle on behalf of Hay. And Hay again fairly athletic, 5'6" to 5'8", and you would think that she would fight back, but not if she was rendered unconscious or stunned based on blows leading to these hemorrhages. And so it certainly seems like this wasn't just a strangulation. This was something where the person hit her pretty hard a couple of times, at least before we had the act of strangulation. I also spoke with Dr. Hartley about something that's always bothered me about the state's theory about the act of strangulation and how it fit into her narrow time frame in which Hay was supposedly killed. Here's my question, and here is her answer. So, in this case, so in this case, the state had a pretty tight timeline because they were trying to claim to the jury during closing argument that in the immediate aftermath of school, Lee was taken to a Best Buy during close and was strangled in a parking lot before her assailant made a phone call from the Best Buy payphone at 2:36. And as part of the case made to the jury during closing argument, the state said that her murderer strangled Lee for about 10 seconds, producing death. Is that consistent or inconsistent with your understanding of the time that it takes to fatally strangle someone? That is definitely inconsistent. That is definitely inconsistent. Strangulation is a multi step process that takes several minutes of pressure on the neck. At first, there's a period of struggle where the grip on the neck cannot be constantly or tightly maintained. Now, admittedly, the length of this struggle is going to differ in each case and is thus unknown. That's because it will depend on the size and the strength of the victim and the assailant. Whether or not the victim was restrained in any way, or whether the victim was incapacitated either by any trauma, any drugs in their system, or by any underlying medical condition. Now, in this case, the two blunt force impacts to her head could have incapacitated her and thus shortened the struggle period. But eventually, in all strangulation cases, the victim is overwhelmed um, and unconscious, and consciousness is usually lost within seconds, although it's usually under 30 seconds. 10 is really a sort of arbitrary number. After consciousness is lost, the pressure then has to be maintained tightly and constantly for an additional 2 to 3 minutes in order for death to occur, because that's how long your brain cells can last without oxygen before they die. So pressure was placed on the neck and then released after the loss of consciousness. the victim will regain consciousness on their own. There are studies out there in the literature about near strangulation victims that support this. And that clearly is a point of no return where the centers of your brain that control your heart and your breathing are affected by the lack of oxygen, and resuscitation is needed in order to prevent death. Uh, but at this point of return is variable. But this point of return is variable because it will depend on each person and is thus unknown. These near strangulation studies support that the point of no return is much closer to the minute's end than the second's end. Disinterred, her body still had some rigor, and that rigor was easily broken, probably due to temperature, according to the medical examiner. Now, if Lee had in fact been dead for almost a month before she was found, did these findings about the rigors more or less make sense? Well, the cold temperatures do complicate the estimate of time of death because it relays all the changes that we see in the body and we use to make that estimate. And cold also does make the body stiff all by itself. I mean, the most extreme example of this would be freezing of the body if the temperature was cold enough. So in order to so in order to assess whether the stiffness is due to rigor mortis or temperature was cold enough, so in order to assess whether the stiffness is due to rigor mortis or cold, really consider other changes we see in the body, namely those that are the evidence of decomposition. Composition is whether the body starts to break down itself on the inside by the release of intracellular enzymes and the normal bacteria that is within your gut, and the composition occurs after rigor mortis has passed. So we see skin slippage on the body, and skin slippage is something that happens in the composition. So because we see evidence of the composition, this means that the rigor mortis have been passed, and therefore the stiffening that we see in the body has to be due to the cold temperatures. Frankly, nothing else makes sense. Okay, and that takes us then. You mentioned skin slippage a bit. So if we're returning to skin slippage, yeah, if you could go into a little bit more detail about it, what exactly skin slippage is in a dead body. Skin slippage is the slogging of the superficial layers of the skin of the body, and it occurs early in the composition and temperature conditions. It starts around the 2 to 3 day mark. Usually, it starts as the formation of what looks like a blister, um, and then when the roof of the blister ruptures, the skin then sloughs off the body. It can make the body surface that is left very slimy to the touch. Skin slippage happens at any point where there is contact with the body, whether it be someone physically moving the body or someone in the environment contracting the body. So in a case like this, you would expect the skin to slug or slip off of the body simply because it was buried in a shallow grave. So any parts of the environment that the body would have been exposed to, like rocks, would have caused skin slippage. Also, the skin would slip from being disinterred or dug up, from being transported to the morgue, and then once the morgue being addressed, photographed, and examined. So all this would be any time something contacted the body. It would cause the skin to slug or slip off. If you looked at the autopsy report in this case, it notes that Lee had quote unquote generalized skin slippage. And so after you look at the, again, black and white photos from the autopsy, what are your conclusions about the amount of skin slippage in this case? I think the amount of, I think that the amount and the distribution of the skin slippage of the body is exactly what you would expect for a body that was buried in a shallow grave for about 3 to 4 weeks and then is interred and examined. So the way the prosecution presented the autopsy report at trial made it seem like Dr. Carell's findings provided firm support for their theory of the case, even though in reality the autopsy report provided at best only ambiguous support for some parts of the story of the theory, and at worst completely contradicted other parts of it. Just one final point about the autopsy results of the prosecution never brought up at trial. And that's the medical examiner's findings about the liver mortis. Dr. Vivati and I talked about this other element of the autopsy photos. Speak, Dick, sir.
Huh?
What?
Where you at, little bro?
Doing homework, bro.
Bro, who are you talking to like that? You're little, bro.
What?
You're little. You're little. Lil, bro.
You're Li, little bro. Stop it.
That's not a word, bucko.
Lil is?
Hell yeah.
Look at your,
Lil.
look at your dumb ass.
Bro, you talking to big bro, buddy. Get on, pussy. Pause.
Oh my god, bro. Give me 15 minutes, bro.
Alright, bro. Alright, hurry up.
Shut up, dude.
You're little.
Alright, bro. Like, get off my dick. Alright, bye, bitch.
15 minutes.
What?
You said 15.
Alright, little bro. Let me study. Like, fuck.
Alright, then, bro.
So the time frame, the temperature is warmer than that, and this time frame could be accelerated, and the temperatures were colder than the time frame would even be more delayed. Okay, so the topsy report of Haley says the body fixed frontal lividity is consistent with what you saw in the topsy photos, with 5 black and white photos that I viewed of the body taken at the morgue. They were black and white, and because of the changes of the composition in third that on the body and some of those photographs, honestly, I cannot tell a lividity pattern based on those photos. However, the report and the medical examiner testimony were very clear that this was interior or frontal lividity. So then, looking at the photos, there's no variation in the shading of gray from the left half of the body to the right half, and so the photographs would therefore be consistent with fixed full frontal. Okay, now if we turn to the state's theory of the case uh, at trial, their claim is that Hae Min Lee was killed at 2:36 and thereafter pre-sailed up in a trunk in her Nissan Sentra for the next 4 to 5 hours. Would that be consistent with the finding of fixed frontal lividity in this case? No, absolutely not. To get fixed full frontal lividity, that would mean that the body would have to be face down and left in that position in the temperature location for up to 8 to 12 hours in order for the lividity to fix. His body was put into the trunk of a vehicle or penciled up, and then transported, and then even buried on its right side within a 4 to 5 hour window. The lividity pattern on the body once it was disinterred would be consistent with the burial position. It would be the right side of the body, and that is not the case. According to the autopsy report, when Heming Lee's body was found in Leah Park, he was found buried on the right side, and the state's Contention at trial was that she was buried in Lincoln Park at the 7 o'clock hour based upon cell phone pings. About 4 to 5 hours after death would that be consistent with the finding of a fixed lividity? No. If she was indeed buried within the 4 to 5 hours of death, again, considering a temperate location, then the lividity pattern would have fixed after burial and then would have been on the right half of her body and not fully frontal. We combine these findings about lividity, rigor mortis, and skin slippage. What's your best guess overall about how much time passed between the death of Heyman Lee and her burial? Well, I think there's two things that we need to consider before estimating the time of death. And one would be the burial of the body, and other would be the examination of the brain. Burial itself delays all the changes that occur after the death, and we already talked about that. There's a published rule of thumb that says that 1 week exposed to air is equal to about 8 weeks buried in dirt. And certainly my experiences here in Detroit have shown that to be actually pretty true. The other is the examination of the brain itself. In circulation, the head gets congested and filled with blood because the pressure on the neck prevents the blood from draining and from the head, ordinarily in circulation victims who are starting to decompose. That actually decomposes in a slightly faster rate than the rest of the body. If that was the case, the brain would not appear normal and have a good demarcation between its gray and white matter structures and just one dead. So based on the fact that this is full fixed frontal ability that the rigor mortis had passed, that we're seeing general skin slips in a body that was buried at cool temperature and internally did not show evidence of decomposition. I think that this was a body that was left face down for up to 8 to 12 hours before it was buried, and that she was buried likely within 8 to 24 hours of death. The lie. Oh, what is this? Oh my god, 25. I can't do this, bro. I'm not reading 25. It's way too much. Why are you doing this? I can't even. I'm trying to read. I can't even read that. What are you doing, Professor? 25 pages, man. I'm trying to listen. I can't listen. Download the episode. I can't. Oh my god. Look at this. This is terrible. This is terrible. This is terrible. Get out of here, Professor. Hell no. Supposedly it's on Thursday. Where you don't even have class on Thursday, bro. Oh my god. Reward up to 2,000. I can't read this. Then they got a brand new car, bro. What's up with dude, bro? What's up with dude, bro? Please don't be long. Please don't be long. 23. Yeah, I'm getting on. I'm hopping on Fort. Fuck that. I'm not trying to. 30, brother. That's 23 pages. That's gonna be it today for today's live. That was a long study session. I've been studying for like since the beginning of the day. Actually, I just put this live on right now. Well, my homework is done. Keep believing on me. The episode's don't work. What can I say? Non mi piace questa struttura. Capisci? Capisci tu, amico?